Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to be doing a weekly review on a Saturday instead of a Sunday because tomorrow is Mother's Day. I won't be here. Today I won't finish a book, probably. I already finished one this morning, which I will be talking about, and I started an 880-page book. The likelihood of me finishing it today and even tomorrow, very unlikely. So we'll go from there. I also have 11 books total this time instead of the typical 7, 8, 9. So I might split this video up into 2 different parts just so it's more manageable. And I might start doing that on a regular basis, do like a midweek review and then a weekly review, just so if I need it, I have more time per book. So we'll see, we'll go from there. The first book is Cold Enough for Snow, the one that I missed last week, by Jessica A.U. Al, perhaps. 5-star read. This is a really simple book with deceptive complexity to it, I think. It is about a woman who's, I got the impression she was like 30s-ish, and she is sort of estranged, just not super close with her mother, and they decide to take a trip to Japan, I believe it was. They go to a museum that the daughter chooses and the mother sort of acquiesces to. And in so contemplating the art, they both separate into different galleries and then meet up at the end, which is the end of the book. She sort of goes over really a multitude of different things about her childhood, her relationship with her mother, how it got to the point that it does in the book, I guess you could say, and the sort of impetus or gravitas that the trip has for the two of them. I found it really fantastic. The prose are like exactly as I would like them to be, basically, which is high specificity, very good flow. It's almost stream of consciousness-esque, but not really, and just like really, really good interiority, which I keep likening to like a Passage North, basically. Not super heavy cognitive load, but still dwelling on like surface memories that become deeper. And when kind of regarded under the pattern or complexity of the ideas as a whole, as they come together, the reader usually puts together things more so than the actual narrator does, which I kind of like. It's just a interesting feedback loop for the reader, I guess. So there's nothing like, I guess, like mind-blowing about this book, but it's just executed to perfection. I think it's a debut, which is astounding. I finished Vagabonds by Jingfang, and this was a 4-star read. It continued to be like impressively, again, interior, quiet. It goes into like science more so than I expected, and I thought those parts would kind of lose me because I'm definitely not interested in science generally, but as it pertained to the characters and how it characterized the people discussing them and the society at large, I thought it was just really effective world building. Each character sort of represents an ideologue of a mode of thinking in either Earth or Mars society. It has been a time of like, I think a couple wars between Mars and Earth, and they send a envoy, I guess, they had sent to Earth, and now they are returning with having processed their culture shock, discussing the ways in which Earth and Mars are different, the ways the ideology was founded on Mars, what it is doing correctly, what it is not doing correctly, aspirations versus sort of realistic, practical thinking, and the reality of just not having as much abundance on Mars with the goals that they have in mind, especially at cross purposes at a generational way. It's quite a few characters, but it centers on one in particular, which kind of grounds the book very nicely. But like I was saying, this is a very quiet book. It's not like space battles, despite it being kind of about war, and it's not about like physical conflicts, even though It is about like labor and other physical qualities being examined from Martians and Terrans, basically. So yeah, it just kind of, it hits a lot differently. People looking for genre fiction will absolutely hate this. It flies in the face of every Western kind of component of sci-fi that we have for modern sensibilities. It's in between, I guess, for prose work. It's like upmarket, I would say. Not quite literary, not so simple as to be categorized as commercial fiction. So I still think it's quite accessible, but it is not concerned with framing or structuring a story about conflict in the way that Western audiences will want it to be. And it is definitely like an idea book. So if that interests you, I definitely recommend it. Next, I read The Luminaries with author Eleanor Catton. It is a mystery. It is thrilling, yet it is none of those things also. So this book is really to do with a byproduct of its structure, I guess you could say. Ostensibly, the premise is simple. A man is killed, a group of men congregate and tell each other what they know about this. Time proceeds, and we learn from different perspectives who has killed the person and ostensibly why, although absolute truth does not exist in this book at all. Then we get the astrology put into it, where every character that is got a perspective anyway has been mapped to a star chart, and astrology plays a big part in this. Every time the location and the month, date, time is given, and then the astrological mapping to it is done. And at a really meta level, this is really fascinating because she is directly interrogating the notion of free will, basically. And what I think this does is prove that fate is a construction of mankind rather than like gods dancing people like puppets and mapping out their trajectory, even though they have been charted. And so the general themes and outcomes and tones are somewhat solidified. It does show how people can sort of make and break their own fate. They can exchange qualities from their signs with one another, and it's sort of the centrifugal force, I guess you could say, that drives the entire plot, as well as their lives, their trajectory. If they don't exchange specific qualities, they can, digress into the worst qualities. I see the sun is going down. It keeps bursting and blasting and then going away and ebbing here. So hopefully it comes back. But the idea is even more interesting in a novel form because we know that it is a construction of an author. So she is using the notions that she has about fate and about astrology, and then mapping a construction by man onto those things and making you think about them, all while serving up like a murder mystery type plot. And we start out with a chapter of half-truths, which is 360 pages, and it brings you all the way around, so it's 360 degrees as well. It's the hardest part of the book to get through because every viewpoint is given around a specific, usually person, but it can be hard to figure out exactly how this is all tying together. And mercifully, there is a summation of all of these things at the end of that chapter. Then time proceeds to a few months in the future, and time then becomes very malleable. It starts jumping around quite a bit. There's sections or parts in this book that will have a dual timeline where it goes back into the past to analyze a specific character we have questions about, while going into the future again, or what will happen, basically, depending on if you take one section of this to be the present or not. It is all historical fiction. It's written from the point of view of like historical novel, but contemporary. The prose are immaculate. It's just one of the most funnest reads. I kind of liken it to Donna Tartt-esque qualities. It is controlling the pace of the reader with the specific diction. It's like dripping with evocative terms and specificity. It really shows that she has done a lot of drafts and refined this down. And as I said, the first part is a novel of half-truths, and then it goes down and down and down and down. Some of the stuff is never answered, and it's left to the subjectivity of the reader to surmise or infer what some of the answers are, some of them kind of central to the mystery. So again, if you're a genre reader, you might hate aspects of this, but I think it does a good job of giving you as much as it can and saying that the truth is very much in the beholder of the person. And I really liked that. Sometimes it contradicts what other people said and did, and it'll always sort of like circle back and give you a hand, even if it's some of the later chapters where it's only like a page or two and it's getting really down to the bare wire. It'll jump back in time and be like, hey, remember that time when such and such character did this? You've already seen this, but it's pertinent and you should remember it. So even with that, I think it's very like just an actual feat that this novel was constructed the way it is and executed. It's another like form meets function book. I gave it 5 stars. Absolutely loved it. Next, I finished Atomik Aztex by Sesshu Foster. This was a 5-star read, but more like a 4.5 rounded up. There are some difficulties I had with it. This is historical fiction meets sci-fi, speculative fiction, decolonization themes, and an alternate timeline. Basically, where it starts and then projects itself into the future is the Spanish are coming to conquer the Aztecs, and instead are conquered by the Aztecs themselves. They get trounced, they take their boats, they go up to Spain and conquer them instead. And from there, the world. Suddenly, we're in a world that is extrapolated from those events to 42, I think it's 1942. It's the Battle of Stalingrad, and our main narrator person is sent to help out and essentially enslave, actually, the Nazis that have prevailed against the Russians and are trying to beat back the Aztecs or kill them. Whereas the Aztecs are taking their time, basically taking them out because they are trying to take them alive and co-opt them into a labor force, which is kind of like interesting in its own sense as like a meta level. But at the same time, throughout this narrative, from before the decision to go to Stalingrad is made to during the battle and afterwards, there's a cognitive dissonance that is introduced, in which our main character has visions, dreams, floods, incursions from what we could surmise as a descendant from Aztec ancestry is working at a meat processing plant and basically gets embroiled in this scheme to unionize. And that's the entire storyline from there. However, as the storylines converge, really interesting things happen to start making commentary about like how bodies are treated under capitalism, labor, and really contrast between a thriving society and person, Aztec, who has like been allowed to flourish and become the dominant culture, versus somebody who's been absolutely kind of like beaten back, driven to do labor their whole lives because they don't qualify for other means, suffering from a lot of like self-doubt. They feel very like diminutive as compared to this other person. And yeah, just trying to claw back some agency. Capitalism is a huge theme in this. And importantly, it's not saying that the world itself would have been like obviously a better place if the Aztecs had won, because there's a lot around like human sacrifice. There's a lot around how society as a whole would be influenced by the cultural beliefs that would have been extrapolated. And then there's a lot of like satirical moments where culture parallels and becomes like this very strange amalgamation of names. Like instead of Bob Marley, it'd be like Lee Marley and all of these things. So some things that are very like similar and dissimilar to what we know today. Again, increasing the cognitive dissonance. Then within the prose, which are very like gregarious, the fine-tuned sense of selfhood that is embedded in the prose, their witty, wry sense of humor, their intelligence for both of these people, as they sort of like bleed together in realities in some ways, is really fantastic. There's a lot of colloquialisms at the beginning of the book. It says that it's an amalgamation of a bunch of different languages, including a subset of Vietnamese, I think, which is no mistake, it says. And so it's sort of making and crafting a voice that is continually showing how counterpoint it is to like a Western narrative, while being very like easy to consume, yet always different, because there are some letters that are not out of place, but like replacing certain letters, like in Atomik Aztex, similar. You understand what they're saying easy enough, but there is the slight hitch of it being different as well. So it's definitely critiquing a lot of different things and some complexity here. Probably not all of which I even was aware of. It's sort of like, I would say, consuming Nupaming, where the structure, the form and structure itself is communicating something as well. Paragraph breaks are hard to come by sometimes, and at least in the beginning of the book, paragraph breaks denote that the narrative is shifting between the characters. As it goes on, however, this happens mid-paragraph, sometimes multiple times throughout walls of text for, pages and pages and whatnot. So it was difficult to get a beat on, and I had to take breaks just because my eyes got tired consuming it. So in every way, it's trying to be countercultural to what it is saying, and absolutely trying to decolonize Western texts. So yeah, it was just like a really fascinating, thought-provoking read, and very emotional when it is able to connect the dissonance between the person who has been colonized and the colonizer, and really drives home how violent colonizing another people is. Like the person at the meat pack has lost culture, he's lost status, some really intrinsic qualities to his personhood that you can only really kind of see when it is juxtaposed with somebody who isn't. So it's just, yeah, it's quite genius, I think. Towards the end, when the paragraphs start, the actual structure starts bleeding together, it is kind of seems like it's not actually being intentional about the thematic structure that it introduces at the beginning. And so that's why I knocked off 0.5 of a point, because it's something that once you decode, you can kind of appreciate. And then once later, it is kind of left to the wayside for no reason that I can see anyway. So yeah, that's Atomik Aztex. I talked about that book quite a bit, so I'll just do one more and then we'll split the video. So this is Lost Children Archive, which was a phenomenal book by Valeria Luiselli. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that somewhat correctly. 5-star read, absolutely. I did this is my first probably actual tandem read, where I looked at the text and I consumed it on audio, sometimes even alternating between the two with the same section, just because there is so much different content to consume within the actual book. It is a road trip novel, basically, to be diminutive about it, in which a family, both of which parents are undergoing a different project, and take the opportunity to take the kids along on the trip. Both of them have work obligations to the side. She's documenting and concerned with migrant children from Mexico-US border, and has like a few things in the pot, basically. The husband is trying to do a specific, like, as far as I can tell, like academic or professional work in which he is investigating the last tribe of the Apache in America. And so their interests kind of align. It is interesting because the relationship is very fraught, and where they go on this road trip is a push-pull type situation. And the kids are just along for the ride. It's kind of like quite intense. Along with them, they take a box of possessions that they take out and consume as they're going along the trip. So each week you could imagine them consuming a certain amount of content as they go. And then they're also, ostensibly learning about history and all that stuff. So the premise is pretty basic, but it gets more and more complex pretty rapidly. There's also a number of like found objects in the book. There's maps that they uncover. They have the items in the box listed intermittently. There's the soundscapes actually in the audiobook, as well as each character voiced by a different person. And so if you consume it both, then you'll get the soundscapes you can actually listen to, which is pretty cool. But then if you only consume the audiobook, you'll miss like the Polaroids and the maps and the artifacts and stuff like that. And it kind of is nice to see the boxes delineated on the actual physical page. It just does something for that other than, hearing a voice list it off. But as it continues, we sort of get to find out if the situation with the parents is going to be resolved or not. And it becomes more about the relationship between each family member to one another, the love of parents and the children, and what their relationship is sort of bleeding into for the children, who are much more aware of what is happening with them than the parents give them credit for. And what being consumed with a specific like plight or cause or source of pain that you're maybe not obsessed with, but like consumed with, something like that, how that can again like indirectly affect everything in your life, including your children, and what happens when that happens, basically. So I think that is good for not spoiling anything, but it gets far more complex, far more interesting, and it becomes like a very intertextuality read, where there are certain colonial texts that are mentioned, and maybe like staples of Western lit for sure, that appear in the book as well. So it becomes kind of like a decolonizing text as well. It's just incredible because it kind of sneaks up on you. When I was consuming it, I was thinking it was like a pretty solid 3 or 4 star read. And then towards the ending, when everything is wrapped up and you start seeing how the intertextuality works, and you start seeing like all the different unconventional modes of conveying each of what is happening with the characters, especially like the little girl and stuff, it just becomes incredible. So definitely highly recommend it. All right, so I still have 6 more books, so I'm gonna stop here and do a second part, and I will see you on the flip side. I don't know if I'll put them out the same day or space it out or something, because Tuesdays I like to do tags, so it might be part 1 Monday, part 2 Wednesday. We'll see.